I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. My co-host, Thistle, my puppy, and Moth, the cat, are also here today, so this should be a fun episode. If you're a returning viewer, it's so nice to see you again. Apologies for the cat tail. And if you're a new viewer, welcome. Thank you for giving me a try. Lately, I've been recording 2 different types of episodes on alternate weeks, and this is a Project Snapshot episode, which just means that I will be mainly talking about my works in progress and various little details that went into the knitting of them. And the other weeks, I talk more about general knitting topics. So that's how it's going. And in addition to my works in progress, I've got a couple finished objects that I wanted to briefly talk about. Oh, I forgot to grab one of them. That's okay. I don't need to talk about it today, since both the pets are now settled on my lap. Anyway, I am drinking hot tea today because it has turned quite chilly, and I remembered to record early enough to be drinking caffeine. And I am wearing my Guernsey-esque jumper, which I knit last fall. I designed it myself based on historic Guernsey sweaters. I have no clue if I'm pronouncing that right. Guernsey, sorry. And I had a lot of fun putting it together, although I made it much more fitted and feminine than a traditional Guernsey would be. Anyway, and it's out of Elsa wool, fingering, woolen spun, medium gray. So you can find the details on my project page. It'll be the Guernsey-esque jumper one. But yeah, so let's get started. I think I'll alternate between things you've seen before and things you haven't. So first, my Miss Lemon jumper, which I've been knitting since the summer and will be knitting until next spring. So this is a lace weight jumper that I'm knitting at 11 stitches to the inch, hence why it's taking me forever. I'm knitting it in pieces, and this is the back. Last time I talked about this, I was worried that my gauge was off, and so I had set it aside to think about it. I was 14 rows away from splitting for the underarms, which is where the pattern, it's a custom fit pattern, so it's designed specifically to what I want the sweater to be as well as to my gauge, and it's great because it includes both row and length, or like inch instructions. And since this sweater has a lace pattern that I'm blocking with pins, the measurements are significantly different between the work in progress and the blocking. Anyway, so I was working to the row count. And so I went ahead and did those 14 more rows, and then I stopped and I blocked it. And it turns out so this is blocked to the measurements it needed to be, and it looks like the sleeve, so I was paranoid about my gauge changing for nothing, so that's really reassuring. A little bit creased now, but yeah, so I ran out of the skein of yarn that I was working on, and this is Knit Picks Shadow Lace in the Opal Heather colorway, and it comes in 50-gram balls, but since it's lace weight, one moment. Thistle, this is not the time. Poor puppy. I don't know why she thinks I'm going to play fetch when I'm talking to a camera. Anyway, since it's lace weight, 50 grams is 440 yards, and I just haven't felt like winding that up because I wind by hand. So it's been a few days since I worked on this, but I think I'm going to go ahead and wind this skein today so that I can get back to it, because I still really enjoy it, even though it's taking a long time. The fabric is really great, and yeah, I don't mind. I love the color too. It's a little dusty today. Probably because I don't dust very often. So I wanted to show my one fish, two fish mittens that are a gift, because on my last episode, these were already a finished object, but they hadn't been blocked yet, and the cuffs were quite different looking because I had accidentally switched the decreases. So I wanted to show you post-blocking, and they look more similar. You can still see the difference. This one curves more at the ends than this one, but yeah. So I just wanted to show you that quickly. Blocking is wonderful. It does magical things. Although these mittens, it's a stranded pattern, and it's in Quince and Company Osprey, which is an Aran weight yarn, and they took forever to dry. I had to turn them inside out. I had to flip them over. Finally, I just put them on my apartment's radiators because they were still damp after like 4 days, which I think is a really good sign of how warm and insulating they'll be. So, yeah. First Christmas present off the list. It's okay, Thistle Sweetie. Talk about my socks next. This might actually be a shorter episode. Usually I ramble on, but I just wanted to do a brief one today. Yesterday I was participating in a book event that I've been participating in since I was 21. Not every year, but you know, I was there at the beginning when I was a book blogger, and so I still like to do it, and it's a 24-hour readathon. So basically you try to do nothing but read for that amount of time, although I totally use audiobooks when I need to do chores or something. But yeah, so I did not really do almost any knitting yesterday. So it's nice to kind of be able to chat about it again today. I apologize for those who follow me on Instagram for the massive amount of photo updates that I was doing during the readathon. Okay, so these are my Arachne stocking socks. Love them. I've been wanting to knit this pattern. It's the Ouroboros pattern, which is a type of spider. So I would assume it's pronounced the Latin way, but not positive. And it's from Soccupied. And I believe Soccupied is an online magazine, but Interweave Press also did a book edition of some of the most popular patterns. And so I got that from the library. And I really enjoyed the book, but what I loved about this pattern is it's spider-inspired lace. And I like how it's a very abstract interpretation of spiders, but it's beautiful, but I don't know. I find it really lovely. And there it is stretched. I should have grabbed my little cardboard sock blocker. The color was much truer when I held it up before. I should play and see why the settings are changing colors now when they didn't used to. Anyway, so as you can see, I've already turned the heel, I've worked down the gussets, now I'm just working down the foot. And I cast this on last week. I love knitting socks, so this has gone quite quickly for a few reasons. But first, I will tell you the yarn, which is Quince and Company Finch. They're 100% wool fingering weight yarn. It's 220 yards and 50 grams, and it is my favorite sock yarn. I plan to do a yarn review about this next week. Okay, so while I love Finch, and while the yardage suggests it's the same as other sock yarns, for me it tends to work up a little, I don't know, I tend to need to go down a few stitches when I knit socks with Finch compared to when I knit socks with, say, Barocco Ultra Alpaca Fine. So I really liked that this pattern came in multiple sizes, and one of the sizes was for a 56-inch sock. Well, the cuff is 56 stitches. The body is, I think, 58. Yes. And I felt that this color, which is peacock, and it's true back here, so it's a really beautiful deep teal, would really play up the kind of gothic inspiration of the lace. And I wanted these for Halloween because, you know, spiders are very Halloween appropriate. I really love spiders. When I was a young child, I would take little baby food jars and set them up on their sides as little like spider habitats so that I could have little pet jumping spiders, which are really cute. They've got polka dots and they're fuzzy and they're not venomous. And I wouldn't like lock them inside or anything, but I would play with whatever spiders showed up. So I don't know, I've always been fond of spiders. Obviously I would prefer not to be bitten by some of the venomous ones, but the vast majority of spiders just doing their thing. Usually eating really annoying bugs, and I love the way that their webs look, so I'm really pleased to have some socks inspired by them. And obviously the name is in honor of Arachne from the Greek myth, who was an excellent weaver who foolishly challenged Athena to a weaving competition and was turned into a spider when Athena got angry. Don't mess with gods. It's never a good plan. Apparently I've decided I should talk about things other than knitting today. Okay, so When I looked at this pattern, I assumed it was going to be a very complicated chart, but it's actually much simpler to knit than it looks. And I love those kinds of patterns that give you just a very high payoff. And as you can see, even the cuff is really decorative, and it, it feeds directly into the leg motif, which is also wonderful. The pattern includes a decorative heel flap as well. That's similar to the cuff. I tried really hard to make myself knit that. I started knitting it, and I got 8 rows in, and I was just looking at those yarn overs, and I was imagining what would happen to them when I'm wearing Oxfords or a lot of my shoes, where they're going to rub at the top of where the shoe comes in at the top. Does that make sense? The back of the heel. And I was imagining a hole being sprung in my socks, and so I couldn't make myself do it. So I ripped back and did a normal reinforced heel flap. I decided, rather than doing the partridge heel flap, to just do a regular slip stitch heel because I thought that it fit a little better with the spiders. Because, there's lots of twisted stitches going on in this pattern, and I love twisted stitches. But as I was saying, at first the cuff was a little tricky to remember, but once I got into the rhythm of it, it made sense. And then this chart, I do look at the chart when I'm knitting, but I don't have to be staring at the chart for every single stitch. Instead, I just kind of glance at it, and I'm like, oh, okay, because it's very predictable, and it's also mirrored. So there's a central stitch, and then everything pivots around that stitch. So it's really easy to make sure, once you've knit halfway across, you know how many stitches you need to knit. So what I'm saying is it's a much simpler sock to knit than it looks like. And as you can see, there are also spiders on the back. I did continue the slip stitching reinforcement into the bottom of the heel because that's a place where socks have worn out for me in the past. Not hand knit socks, but retail socks. And all I do for that is I'm continuing the slip stitches on the stitches that you end up with the heel turn. So I don't slip any of the gusset stitches that you pick up. And so what I do is on the round where you pick up the gusset stitches, I start with a new needle here, I go all around as normal, and then once I've picked up the gusset stitches on this side, I put a stitch marker, and then I have all the heel stitches on that same 4th needle, and that lets me see very easily which stitches I should be knitting normally and which ones I should slip. The other thing is that when you're doing a heel flap, it's back and forth, so it's very easy to know whether it's a slip stitch round or a normal round because you have a right and a wrong side. Once you're knitting in the round, it can get a little trickier to tell. So what I do is I make sure that I'm slipping the stitches on the same round that I'm decreasing on the gusset. So that's just like a visual cue that's a little easier. And if you do want to try continuing the slip stitching through the heel turn and the bottom of the foot, I would suggest starting with the regular slip stitch heel, which is slip one, knit one across, and you're slipping the same stitches every row, and every other row. And the reason why I would suggest starting with that one instead of the Eye of Partridge is because this one, it's a lot easier to read when you're doing the heel turn, and so it's much easier to continue those columns of slip stitches. With the Eye of Partridge, it's just a little trickier to tell which stitches need to be slipped that time, if that makes sense. So I think that's everything I have to say about that sock. I'm really looking forward to being able to wear them. I made the leg pretty tall. I like to have both taller and shorter legs socks because with different shoes and different outfits, I just think it's good to have variety. So I don't have like, one set leg length that I knit all of my socks to. Thistle, you can come up. Uh-oh, hopefully she won't find I put the squeaky toy next to me in the chair. Okay. So this is technically a finished object, and I'm very excited about it as a finished object, but I'm going to discuss the finished object type things next week. And instead, I'm going to talk about the things I would have talked about if it was a work in progress on this episode. Still trying to figure out the best way to divide, so let me know if you have any opinions. Hello, my moth. Take this. Okay, so this is my Herbarium vest. And it is self-designed. So you can see it's Fair Isle. And it's out of Alice Starmore Hebridean 2-ply in quite a few colors. You can see them all on my project page, as well as how much yardage each color took. And I'm really excited about this. If you follow me on Instagram, you can tell I'm excited because I was posting a whole bunch of photos, but we will talk about that next week. So what I wanted to talk about this week was a few things just as far as the knitting process went. Last week I talked about the back of the neck shaping, so I won't talk about that again. Had to do some lap management. This'll wanted to flip around, and I had to make sure she didn't sit on top of me. Okay, so I don't think that I've talked about how I planned for the neck and armhole shaping. I've talked about how I centered on both the front and back, and rather than continue, it is an all over pattern, but rather than knit it continually in the round, I have a side seam here, if that makes sense, so that both the front and back are centered. So what I did is I looked ahead and I checked to see how many stitches I was going to need to bind off at the armhole, which I can't remember exactly what it is now. I was using Ann Budd's vest pattern from her handy book of sweaters as a general guide, although I did tweak it a bit. I can't remember how many stitches it was. Something like 4 and 4 and then, but okay, so the point is that I looked ahead to see how many stitches I would be binding off here, and then I took the graph of the all over pattern and I kind of looked at where those stitches would fall and how it would end up looking in the pattern, and that's how I came to decide to do it the way I did, where they meet at the side seams instead of doing one continual pattern all around, because I realized that it would be a lot easier to work the armhole shaping if it happened this way. And I actually got pretty lucky with how this pattern was able to work with the shaping, because I think I added 1 or 2 extra decreases and then I could get it so that it was a full repeat again. So, I mean, that's just going to depend on what pattern you're using. But I did look ahead, and I kind of, I do the graphs on my phone with JKnit Lite. I think it's a free app, and it basically gives you a little highlight bar. Anyway, so since I was working on my phone, what I would do is just move it, like zoom in and then move it over so that the edge of my phone screen lined up with however many stitches were going to be lost. And so that was pretty easy to plan because the front and the back are the same. And then for the neckline, I knew I wanted a crew neck, and so I decided to start with binding off this many stitches in the pattern. I'm not deliberately being vague. I really don't remember what it is. I want to say 24, but I could totally be lying. And then I planned the stepped decreases as well so that I would end up with a full repeat up here. So basically, like, planning ahead seems like it's going to be complicated, but in reality, all you need to do is look in your pattern and figure out about how many stitches you're going to be binding off in different places, and then check and see the best way for that to fit onto your graph, if that makes sense. And let's see. So obviously I did corrugated rib. Oh, I'm going to have to start another thing. So I did corrugated rib at the neck and the armbands. I knew I wanted to do it for the neckband, and then I wasn't sure about the armband until after I'd done the neckband. But I did about 3/4 of an inch of corrugated ribbing, and I do not enjoy knitting corrugated rib, but I absolutely love how it looks. In this case, well, I did not enjoy knitting this corrugated rib because whatever yarn you hold in your left hand is going to be a little more prominent whenever you're doing two-stranded knitting, and whichever yarn you hold in your right hand is going to be a little less prominent, and that's because one of them, the yarn is traveling further, so the stitches end up a little bigger. And with this corrugated rib, color theory says that warm colors are more prominent to the eye than cool colors. And I wanted the corrugated rib to look balanced. So I decided to hold the warm colors in my right hand and the cool colors in my left hand to kind of balance each other out. But then I also wanted the warm colors to be the purling, because there weren't going to be quite the same dramatic value changes. And when you're purling in color, when you're purling with different colors, see, the color shows through in the purl bumps, and I thought that it would look less obvious in this because there are 3 colors here. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to figure out why my camera is messing with lighting like that. Versus in this, I thought it would look better in the knits. So essentially, I was knitting with my left hand and purling with my right hand. And I am a continental knitter by default, even though I do quite a few projects in English style. So I'm pretty comfortable with English style knitting. However, ribbing English style or throwing drives me insane, because when you're doing it continental, you barely need to move your finger in order to get the yarn in front for purling. So it's not that big a deal. But when you're doing it throwing, you have to like loop it around. And then because you're stranding, you know, you have to put it in the back. So every 2 stitches, I had to move it forward and then purl. And usually if I'm doing a project with my right hand, if there's ribbing involved, I still use my left hand to do the rib. I just find it much less fiddly with my left hand. Anyway, so that's why I found this corrugated rib quite fiddly, but I definitely think it's worth the final result. It did take me a few days to decide the color order. I tried a couple things and I wasn't happy with them, and it's not fun to pick up an entire neckband worth of stitches and then realize that you don't actually like that color and have to pull it all out. And then I saw Pavranka on Instagram. Oh, I can't remember her actual name. That's her username. But she also did a self-designed Fair Isle vest. We're both entering our vests in the Fruity Fair Isle knit along. And she did this beautiful gradient on her neckband. And it really helped me think a little bit outside the box, because I was trying to come up with a way to combine the same colors but in a different order so that it would just look more interesting. And so she really inspired me to try a gradient, and I think it worked really well. I really love how it looks. What I did do is, so there are 3 colors in both of these, although in this case the Erica and the Capricae are very close. And I switched colors at the same time on both rows. I didn't stagger it the way that I staggered a lot of the foreign background colors here. And then I got to the last row, and while I really liked how the gradient looked, when I tried binding off in either of the light colors, it looked a little bit unfinished. So I went ahead and I rejoined the Erica, which is that yummy plum color, and I did just the bind off in that. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I would need to do 1 row of knitting in the Erica first in order to make sure that the other color didn't show through. But I really liked how it gives just a thin line. It's easier to see on the armband because there's not. How it gives just a thin line at the end. And I was really pleasantly surprised at how just switching for the bind off alone, it doesn't actually show, because obviously those colors are not going to be the Erica. But it doesn't flip or do anything, and this is just a regular bind off. And I think it makes it look really decorative, the chain. A lot of times I'm always looking for bind-offs that aren't the regular bind-off, but I really do. I think that's pretty. So the other thing about the neckband is I realized 1 row before the end, or no, it was actually on the bind-off row, that the front of it wanted to flare a little. It's not flaring now because I blocked this pretty aggressively, but it was flaring when I was knitting, even though this is horizontal, so usually you always pick up 1 for 1. So I'm not sure. I think it's because corrugated rib doesn't pull in the same way a normal rib band would, which this sweater doesn't have, and you can see it's flaring a little, so I might need to reknit that or reblock it. Anyway, so what I did was on the bind off row, just along the front, because that's the only place where it looked like it was a little loose, every other corrugated or every other purls, instead of binding off 2 purls, I did a knit 2 together. So I just did some decreasing right on the bind off edge. So basically for every 8 stitches, I did 1 decrease. And that seems to have been enough. I just kind of arbitrarily chose that number. I wanted to do the decreases and the purl columns because I thought it would be less obvious. And I think it is. Is there anything else? Oh, the waistband I did regular ribbing, and that's because I wanted this to be quite fitted on my waist, but my waist is significantly smaller than my shoulders. It's at least a foot smaller. Yeah, I've got broad shoulders. Which is 30 centimeters for my metric friends. And so since corrugated rib is not that stretchy, I knew that there was no way that I could do a corrugated rib band small enough to fit my waist that would come on over my shoulders. So I did regular 2x2 ribbing, and I used the Selkie colorway, which is in the main vest, but it's only 1 row on each of the bluish, greenish background repeats, so it's not a major color in the vest. And I thought this would be a good option because if you look closely, the Selkie has so many colors running in it, so I thought it would meld the purples and the greens together. Plus, I had more of the Selkie than I did of some of the other colors because of one of my incredibly generous knitting friends who sent me a bunch of her Alice Starmore yarn to play with. So that was the other factor, was yardage. And because I wanted the ribbing to not stretch out as I'm wearing it, instead of knitting it in the round, I knit it flat, and then I mattress seamed, and I will talk about why you see different yarn there too. And I love mattress stitch because it blends so well. This is the one that I mattress stitched. So it's invisible. I think it's a form of magic. And I did about 2.5 inches of the ribbing. And then for each side, when I cast on with a provisional cast on so I could just undo it. And I did do a little bit of shaping with this. First of all, I did the ribbing on 000 needles because I did the body on 0 needles. That's just because I'm a loose knitter. So basically, I always go down 2 needle sizes for the ribbing. And because I'm a loose knitter, that means I use my 000s for bands. Which, it is what it is. And so I knew that I wanted to end with 2x2 ribbing, and I knew that I wanted to do some decreases, but I didn't want it to look super bunched where the color work was. So what I did was I started with 2x3 ribbing. Well, first I did 1 row just plain knit so that I wouldn't have any purl bumps. And then I started 2x3 ribbing. And then after I think 4 or 5 rows, I did a decrease in each of the purl columns so that then it was 2x2 ribbing. So basically I decreased 20% of my stitches. And then I knit for about 2.5 inches. I have to start a new segment. And I thought this was going to be a short episode. I should have known better. Okay, so then I got to the bind off. And originally I did the invisible 2x2 bind off, which is a sewn bind off. And the idea is to basically do a kind of grafting or Kitchener so that it looks continual. But I don't think it looks as good as the 1x1 invisible bind off, which I love and use frequently. And the other issue with it, and the reason why I've decided to swear off doing the 2x2 invisible sewn bind off ever again, is that it's not terribly stretchy. So I did this sewn bind off for both of the waistbands, both of the pieces. I seamed them. I went to try the vest on, and I could barely get it on. There wasn't enough give in the bind off. I managed to get it on, and then I had to get it off, and I had a brief moment of panic because I live alone, so I don't have someone to yank it, and it got stuck like right here. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to cut myself out of this sweater. That's terrible. But I did manage to yank it off. But I knew that obviously I'm not going to wear a vest very frequently if I'm that stressed about putting it on and off. And so I took out the seaming, and then I had to take off the bind off. And if you've ever taken out a sewn bind off, it's not fun. And in this case, because of the way you do the invisible 2x2 sewn bind off, it was a nightmare. And this is like the 4th time I've had to pull out this bind off, because I also tried using it on knee-high socks with a lot of negative ease, and it didn't stretch enough either. And so while I was doing this, and it took, such a long time. Anyway, while I was ripping out this bind off, I promised myself that I would not get in this situation again. So I am just forswearing ever doing that sewn bind off again, so that I don't have to rip it out. I do still have to rip it out on a pair of knee-high socks that are in hibernation. But other than that, never again. So I ended up using the same bind off that I did for the first pair of knee-high socks that I had to fix, and that is the Jenny Surprisingly Stretchy bind off. Yes. And sometimes this bind off can flare, but once I blocked it, it looks a little bit loose right now, but that's because there's negative ease in the waistband, and once it's wearing, it doesn't flare at all. So I'm really pleased with how that turned out, and I also think it's kind of cool because, let's see if I can get so it's got a chain on this side and a chain there, so it's got like 2 chains. And I like how, since there's a yarn over in each of them, it makes it a little bit decorative right at the edge. So I was pleased with the second bind off, and then I had to re-seam it. I started seaming with the Alice Starmore yarn, but when you do mattress stitch, usually you do mattress stitch for about 1 inch, and then you pull the yarn tight and it snugs it up. And when I pulled the yarn tight, the yarn snapped on me. I've never snapped any yarn while I'm knitting. I know that a lot of people have that problem with Brooklyn tweed yarn, which I have not knit with. But yeah, I guess since this is a woolen spun yarn, and I didn't have any problems tensioning it when I was knitting, but having to pull it tight enough for seaming, it just wasn't going to work. So I didn't want to go and get whatever yarn. Like, my yarn is stored on the top shelf of my kitchen cabinets, and the scraps boxes are on this little cabinet above my sink, and I can't always reach up, which is why I have yarn there instead of like kitchen utensils. And so I wasn't in the mood to reach up above my head, so I just grabbed some leftover yarn I had from my sister's sweater that is in hibernation and used that to seam, because I decided it was a fairly similar color. And so yeah, that's why there's 2 different shades of yarn with the ends weaving in. And as you can see, you can't see that color at all on the outside. So you can use whatever, there it is, whatever yarn you want to mattress stitch. Yet another reason that it is wonderful. And yeah, so the final thing I would say is that I didn't do any shaping in the body, even though now, as you can see, obviously the bust is wider than down here. And that's all from the blocking. This yarn, once I got it soaked and got it out and got it on the blocking mats, it was like modeling clay. It was incredible. And so I pulled out my measuring tape and I blocked the chest to 16 inches, which is 32 inches around, which is 1 inch of negative ease on me. And that looked really good. And then I was trying to figure out what to do about the bottom, because I didn't want to pull it widthwise to stretch it out and make it look as good as this, because then it would be too wide on my waist. And so instead I pulled it lengthwise a bit, and that helped it stretch out too, and that got it down to, this is about 25 inches around, which is an inch of positive ease on me. Or it might be, my waist is 24 inches usually, 24 to 26, but then of course this might be at my rib cage, which is more like 26 to 27 inches. So I don't know. I'll measure my body and the vest and put that information in my project page, because I find the way that ease looks on people to be very interesting. But yeah, so as you can see, it blocked beautifully. And I didn't mess with the ribbing at all when I was blocking. I just pulled it down vertically a little to make sure that it wasn't stretching this way. I was surprised I've never tried knitting regular ribbing with this yarn before, and I don't think, like, the ribbing isn't nearly as snug and bouncy as most of the yarn I've knit ribbing with, and I think that's just because it's a more loosely plied yarn. It's not like the tight twists that you see in a lot of the Quince and Company yarn or the Elsa wool. But it does the job. I'm really glad that I did the waist seams, though. I think otherwise it would tend to grow a little too much. I think that's everything I have to say about this as a work in progress. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Oh, and then obviously I did the crew neck shaping, and I did it a little deeper because I like to show my collarbone. So we only have one more project to talk about, so I will start a new segment and share with that. It's Christmas knitting. I just realized I've been holding things in front of my face while I talk a lot, so hopefully you guys can still hear my voice and it isn't too bad. I tend to have a voice that carries. As a child, I was often told to use my indoor voice, so at least that's good with podcasting. Okay, so my last work in progress is the Christmas gift for my niece, and you will never see this work in progress in any of the photos that I do for the podcast cover cards, and that's because my niece is 10 and she enjoys YouTube. And she doesn't watch my videos, but I know that she's seen them, so she's seen the photos that come up. So, and I really want this to be a surprise. So, it's a faux thistle! That's what I'm calling it. As you can see, faux thistle has her head and her body and her two front legs. They got attached last night. And so she still needs her back legs, her tail, and of course her ears, because she can't be thistle without ears. I am so happy with how this is turning out. It's going to be kind of hard to give her away because she's so snuggly. She's similar in size to kind of Build-A-Bear type stuffed animals. I'm sure most of you, at least in the US, who have small children in your lives are familiar with Build-A-Bear sizing. My niece is obsessed with Build-A-Bear. She had like her 6th birthday party there. Anyway, so let's talk about faux thistle. She is knit out of Lion Brand Fun Fur, which is 100% polyester eyelash craziness. And I got it on a D-stash. The pattern calls for a lot, like 400 something yards. And since there's only 50 yards in each skein, or 64 yards, if I had bought it retail, the yarn alone was going to cost me $40 something. And I was like, I don't think so. But I found this on D-Stash. It was 8 skeins for $8, which included shipping. So she must have just wanted it out of her house. And it was like fate was telling me, because it was gray like thistle is, and fate was telling me that I should knit this thistle for Christmas. I expected to be very miserable knitting with this yarn. I do have to knit fewer stitches in one session because it doesn't have the bounce of wool, but the knitting itself isn't too bad. I think because it's stockinette, and the pattern, which I'll talk about more, gives some good tips for working with it, and the pattern is it's a smart pattern. It makes it as simple as it can be. So knitting with it is not as terrible as I expected. However, seaming it, because all the pieces are knit flat and then you seam them, seaming it is not fun at all, because when you're doing mattress seaming, you're doing it on the right side, but you're moving, the yarn goes back and forth between the two pieces. How else are you going to make them go together? And so it catches all the fur. So every few stitches, I have to stop and tighten more frequently than I would if it was a normal mattress seam. And then I have to like dig out all the little fluffy bits of each of the seams. And it's really difficult to read your knitting in this fabric for obvious reasons. This is what it looks like. And so I don't always know if I'm 1 stitch in from the edge or 2 stitches in from the edge. So I decided, hey, it's furry, it's fluffy, it's not going to matter in the long run whether I'm always on exactly the same stitch. And so I just decided to worry less about it. And yeah, I would not want to mattress seam, like I wouldn't do it for fun, but it's manageable for this project. Let's see. So this is where the seam is. You can kind of feel it. That's the seam. As you can see, once you do the mattress seam and fluff up all the yarn, it really becomes invisible. So it's worth it. But yeah, the knitting, not too terrible, but the seaming, I would not recommend seaming with eyelash yarn as your first ever seaming experience. The other thing is, I don't usually count rows. Like, I know a lot of knitters use row counters. I'm sorry, I have something in my eye. Okay. And I don't usually do that because if I'm using a chart, I've got my little highlighter so I can just leave it on the row I want. And if I'm knitting plain or like, you know, just doing increases or something, I just look at my fabric and count if I need to. But as I said, it is really difficult to count or to read your knitting with this. That's the purl side. That's something I found interesting. So the purl side ends up fluffier than the knit side. So you can kind of read it if you have to, but it's not the most fun. So I've been trying to remember, because in between the shaping rows you do quite a few rows of plain stockinette, so I've been trying to remember to count my rows as I do them and to make a note of that on my phone so that next time I know how many rows I have left. A couple times I got distracted while I was knitting and watching things, so then I had to stop and count on the legs, but it seems to have worked because the legs are the same size. Okay, so the pattern, oh my gosh, what is the name of the pattern? It's a fabulous pattern. I heard about this designer on Fruity Knitting. She did an interview with them, and she is a former educator. I believe that she was a professor of education. So she was teaching people who wanted to be teachers. And so she is very knowledgeable about child development. So her designs are knit for different age groups to appeal to different ages of children, which I think is really neat. Her name is Lorraine Pistorio. And her pattern, you can tell she must have been a fabulous teacher, because this pattern leaves nothing to chance. It told me exactly what circumference the head and the muzzle should be at when I was stuffing them. It told me the circumference for the body. It told me the circumference for the leg and the paw. It told me how tall the leg should be, how tall the body should be, and the neck. It told me how many inches apart the eyes should be and how many inches it should be from the nose. It told me how many inches the legs should be apart. So much easier, as I'm sure anyone who's knit softies before knows. The finishing is the make or break point, because if you get the eye placement wrong or just things get a little wonky, suddenly it looks kind of weird instead of cute. I had a lot of problems knitting softies when I first started. It did not come naturally to me at all. My niece loves them enough that I persisted, but yeah, and so whenever I'm trying to decide whether to use a softie pattern, I go to all the projects, and if like 90% of the projects look cute, then I know I'm good. If like the designer's project looks cute and the other projects all look a little weird, in my view, obviously they're happy with their project, then I know that pattern isn't going to work for me. Anyway, yeah, so this pattern, it doesn't leave anything to chance. So if you've never knit a softie before, but you would really like to knit one, and you like one of her designs, definitely worth it. I think they're usually about $4. I was gifted this pattern, so thank you. But this one is $5. But yeah, I mean, it's instead of just saying, oh, stuff lightly or stuff firmly, having the actual dimensions to stuff everything and put everything together, all you do is have to get out your measuring tape, and then you end up with something that looks adorable just like the designers. She also has some really cool tips and tricks, and the way that she uses shaping is really good. Like, she's just really excellent at designing softies and then writing patterns that let other people knit similar adorableness. So I would definitely recommend her patterns. Most of her patterns knit up to a pretty big size, so obviously if you want a little softie, that won't work. Yeah, so I am completely in love with this project. I also thought I would mention, I can't remember exactly what size nose and eyes she has you order. I ordered them from a website. I originally found the seller on Etsy, but they only sell bulk in Etsy, but if you go to their regular website, you can get individual ones. Anyway, my point is, the nose and eyes are actually the exact same size as Real Thistle's nose and eyes. So I think this is turning out so well. I think my niece is going to love it. The only modification I'm going to make is when I attach the ears, instead of doing them both up. And the pattern is written to look like a Westie Terrier, actually. Obviously, so my major modification. Oh, glare! So cute! Is making it in gray. But I'll be doing one ear up and one ear down, just like Real Thistle. And yeah, it's super snuggly. And, oh, the one thing that I did do was, since the eyes, in my opinion, can really make or break your toy, if you get the wrong eyeball, suddenly it looks like a demented toy that's going to come to life at night and, like, you know, do terrible things. As a child, I really enjoyed reading, like, horror books about evil dolls, so this might just be me. So when I was ordering from the website, because one pair of plastic eyes is not going to be a lot of money, but, you know, you do have to pay for shipping, I went ahead and I ordered 3 different colors in this size so that I could try them, you know, in person, so to speak. So I ordered a solid black size, I ordered an iridescent brown, and then I ordered a regular brown. And the regular brown ended up looking best. And that's pretty much the color of Thistle's eyes, too. So, yeah, I am over the moon happy with how this is knitting up. Like, I knew that my niece would be excited to see it on Christmas, but I didn't really expect to enjoy knitting it. And if, like, when I was just knitting the head, I was like, not so much. But once it started to come together, I found myself really enjoying it, and with a lot of affection for little faux Thistle. Real Thistle does not appreciate it when I take photos of them together. But here I don't care. She has a good life. A little bit of torture isn't going to kill her. So, as you can see, faux Thistle's head is bigger than Real Thistle's head. I measured Real Thistle's circumference after the stuffing, and she's got about 2/3 the size skull that faux Thistle has. However, Lorraine the designer, she designs her stuffed animals to have significantly bigger heads, kind of like babies, so that they look adorable and appealing. And so with the final size, with the body and everything, it really is going to be the same size as Thistle sitting up. So I cannot wait for this Christmas. I hope it stays a surprise. I'm so bad at keeping things I'm knitting secret, and so I've been texting photos to my mom and my sister, but I only text photos when my niece is not in the vicinity, and then I tell them to delete the photos, because obviously my niece enjoys stealing their phones and playing on their phones. So hopefully we'll manage to keep it a secret so that she can be super happy on Christmas, but even if she knows beforehand, I think she's going to really love it. So I'm working on the back paw right now, the first back bit, and I went ahead and ordered from Amazon one of the little recordy things that you can get, so you can record like 10 seconds and then you put it inside the stuffed animal, and then when they press whatever, they'll hear your voice. So I thought that would be a nice touch, and especially since I got the yarn for such a good deal. Oh, I fibbed. I have one more project to talk about. I thought that would be the end. But yeah, so that's, oh, and I'm entering that in the Merry Along, which is a craft along being held by Jules of So Sweet Violet, who has a very sweet and calming and relaxing podcast. If you have not heard of her, she's already very well known, and she has a very popular blog before she started podcasting and sells project bags and all kinds of things. So you probably know about her, but just in case. And she is doing a craft along from now until the end of November, I believe, for basically holiday presents. So Christmas, Hanukkah, Yule, New Year's, Kwanzaa, whatever kind of holiday in the winter you would like to knit gifts for. So, and she's allowing works in progress because I started faux thistle before at the beginning of her craft along, but I'm still going to enter her. And yeah, it's a good start to my Christmas knitting, and then I can watch faux thistle. I can poster around the apartment in the lead up to Christmas. Okay, so the final project is not yet begun, but it is swatched for. So last episode I was talking about the next sweater I was planning to do, and I showed you the yarn, and then I went ahead and swatched for it so that I would be able to cast it on once I finished my Fair Isle vest. This is Canopy Fingering from the Fiber Company in sarsaparilla, which is apparently a soda drink. It's a very beautiful kind of silvery brown, and as you can see, this fabric is super drapey. It's got a lot of baby alpaca and bamboo-based rayon in it, and then 30% merino. So that's why it's got a lot of drape, and it's really nice and soft. So I did 2 swatches, and I knit this. I started on size 1, so I'm going to knit it English style, and in English style I tend to be a regular tension knitter, so I'm not loose the way I am with left-handed continental, but I'm not tight either. So the ball band, I can't remember exactly what needles it recommended, but the gauge it recommended was like 7 to 9 stitches an inch, which really surprised me because usually I knit fingering for sweaters more between 6 to 7 inches, but once I started knitting up with the yarn, I understood why they said that. Anyway, so I started on size 1s, and that fabric was a little stiff, and it didn't have the drape I wanted, so I went up to size 2s, and I liked that, but then once this one was blocking, I was bored, so I did another swatch on 2.5s, and this one I think is a little too loose. I think the 2s are going to be the sweet spot. As far as you can see, so this is the same amount of stitches. So I don't know, it's funny. In the past, I don't always swatch on multiple needle sizes. I will swatch a lot to try out different stitches, but for some reason I've never really tried out. I tend to just stick with my first needle size unless there's something dramatically wrong with it. But in future, I'm definitely going to swatch on multiple knitting sizes because I don't think I've always gotten the best fabric for the yarn, if that makes sense. Like sometimes my fabric was a little too stiff. Sometimes I think I erred too far on the side of sizing up needles, and so it doesn't have a lot of structure. So I think that swatching with 3 needle sizes is really nice because it gives me a good idea of what's going on. I guess it takes a little more work, but I really enjoy swatching, so that's not a big deal for me. And yeah, of course, these are all on my Diet Craft Darn Pretty Heavy Metals, which actually almost everything I'm knitting on is. So these. And it's an interchangeable set from 0 to 3 that includes sizes 1.5 and 2.5. That's US, of course. I'm really bad with millimeter needles. I'm sorry. I know size 0 is 2.0 millimeters, but then I don't know what all the other sizes are. So having interchangeable sets in sizes from 0 to 9 obviously makes swatching a lot easier because I don't have to go out and buy a new needle if I think the size is wrong. So I realize that not everyone has that privilege. But if you do, it's interesting how the fabric, I don't know, like this I think would work really nicely for a cowl, but this one is a little firmer for a sweater. Other than the cat fur, you can see I'm using this eyelet pattern, which is the Broderie Anglaise that I talked about on the last episode. I don't know how you say that in English. Is it just broderie anglaise? I don't know. So that's why I switched to French for that. But I'll include a link on the project page to a YouTube video that shows you how to do this, because I think it's a really pretty texture. And the tutorial has you do it as an 8-stitch repeat, so you get a lot of the eyelets. And since this is going to be a sweater and it's so soft, I wanted to be able to wear it next to my skin. So I started spacing the eyelets out more, both rows and stitches, to see what would work that I would be able to wear without a camisole underneath until I got to the top. And so that was really kind of a practical thing. And then I just was trying out the twisted stitch ribbing because I plan to use that for the borders and then the sailor collar that I'm going to do. Anyway, but Hannah, who is Word Lily on Instagram and Ravelry, she was saying that she really liked how the eyelets diffuse as they go up on the swatch. And I realized that I could actually do that as a design feature, because I'm going to make this a longer jumper so that I can wear it with some of my lower rise pants. And so the bottom that's right above the hem ribbing is going to, you know, have other fabric, like my skinnies or whatever, and so I don't need to worry so much about it being more see-through compared to up top where I don't want something see-through. So yeah, I could do that as a design element, and I'm thinking that I will. I'm going to cast on today, but of course I have to do the ribbing first, so I still have a day or two to decide, but I think that that might actually be really fun. As far as the pattern, I think I'm going to go ahead and use my credit. I have a credit for custom fit, because if you buy your first custom fit pattern within 30 days of signing up for an account, then you get a free pattern. And I had gotten one for my Miss Lemon jumper, and her patterns are written so that everything is seamed in pieces, even the sleeves. And with a lot of my sweaters, I knit the sleeves in the round, even if I knit the body in pieces. But since this yarn is so drapey and it's got a lot of alpaca and rayon in it, I really want everything to be seamed so that it has as much structure as possible. So I thought that this would be a good use of the custom fit credit. And the gauge I like is 7.3 stitches to the inch, which is finer than you would expect for a fingering weight, especially since this fingering weight has 200 yards and 50 grams. But the yarn knits up more finely than you would expect. That must be the fiber content? I don't know. I used to think that as long as the yardage to the weight was the same, the yarn had to be about the same size. But that's obviously not true, because the Finch yarn has more yards to a gram, and it knits up, I don't know, it knits up different at a slightly bigger gauge than this. So I think that fiber content has a lot to do with that as well, which is important if you're substituting yarn, and that's probably why I ran into a little bit of troubles with some of my early sweaters and getting the gauge a little off. So that's why I really like swatching now, because I can listen to the fabric and see what it wants to be. So I'm very excited to cast this on, and hopefully it'll go fairly quickly, because it's a lot of plain knitting. And I'll be able to wear it sometime. I'm hoping to finish it by the end of November, but we'll see. I'm really excited about the sailor collar. I've been doing quite a bit of research to figure out how I'm going to manage that, and I think I've decided, but we'll talk about that as it goes. So that was me drawing out my knitting as much as possible for another episode. Apparently I can always find more to talk about. The pets are very happy. They are both on my lap. I'll go ahead and take a photo with my phone and insert it so that you can see their happiness. And let's see if they're going to want to say goodbye when I say goodbye. Ooh, I know, Moth, you don't like being picked up like this. There's Moth saying goodbye. And here's Thistle, who is much more tolerant, as a puppy should be. Anyway, it was wonderful to chat with you again. As always, you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as The Charm of It. I love hearing from you. I love getting comments on YouTube as well. I started the podcast to connect with other knitters, and so that's I really appreciate everyone who takes the time out. And yeah, so you can keep up with me there. I will say that this is kind of embarrassing, but I have quite a few Instagram followers now, and that means that whenever I open Instagram and it shows me like everyone who's liked my photos or left comments, it only shows so many. And so when more people have done it, then some people drop off the list. And so I don't, like, sometimes I always see your comments, but if you've tagged me in the caption of your own photo and I see that, but I don't have time to reply at the time, if I try to go back later, it's off my list and I can't go back, and I can't always remember everyone's username. So if I ever don't reply to something where you've captioned me in a comment, that's why, and I'm sorry. I wish that Instagram worked differently. What you can do, because it works differently, is somehow mark me as in your photo, and then that notification is at a different spot, and so it doesn't fall off the list. Yeah, I wanted to explain why sometimes that happens. If you leave a comment on my photo, I always see those because I can just go to my comment and, refresh them. But yeah, I always see things that you have left for me, and I try to reply right away when you've tagged me in a caption on your photo so that doesn't happen. But, life is not always Instagram compatible. But yeah, so anyway, that explanation aside, I really enjoy getting to know people, and I'm so grateful for everyone who watches and everyone who gets in touch, as always. I hope that you're having a wonderful end to October. See you soon.